We are going to be in this lesson solving quadratic functions by factoring. So when we do that, there are 4 basic steps that you need to do. The first thing you need to do is move all terms to one side and set it equal to 0. Then you'll factor what you have on that side. Then you'll set each factor equal to 0 and solve for each x value. Then you write your answer as a solution set. And so what that means is you'll say x equals the set of whatever the numbers are. So let's go ahead and practice. So if I look here, everything's already on one side. So that means we go to the next step. We look for that GCF. And so we look and see what is a common factor between these two. Well, the common factor between the two of them is x. So I have x that I factor out. That means I'm dividing each term by x. So what's left behind is x plus 9. And it's still equal to that 0. So we have it factored. Now we're going to say each of the factors equal to 0. So I use a little table to help organize my thoughts. And so I'll list the factors up at the top. And then I'd show the work below. So x equals 0. There's no work to be done. X plus 9 equals 0. I need to move the 9 to the right-hand side. So that means I need to subtract 9 from both sides. And so x is equal to a negative 9. Now that I have both of those solved, I'm ready to write my solution. And my solution is x equals the set. And we need to write these in order from least to greatest. So the smallest number is negative 9. So negative 9, comma, 0. And so that's how you would do it when factoring. So you always start with that GCF and then go from there. So let's go to the next one. And on the second one, again, I'm looking for that GCF first. And so my GCF, this time, there's a number that can divide into both 4 and 8. That number is 4. There's an x in both parts. So my GCF is 4x. I write that down to where it's in front of my parentheses. I'm going to divide both of them by 4x. So when I divide it, I end up with 4x squared divided by 4x. The 4's cancel. X squared divided by x gives me x. Negative 8x divided by 4x gives me a negative 2 because the x's cancel. And that's equal to 0. So again, I have my 2 factors. So I take and make my chart. This time I have a 4x for one of the columns and an x minus 2 for the other. So 4x equals 0. And x minus 2 equals 0. If I was to solve this, to get that 4 away from the x, I would need to divide. So therefore, x equals 0. If I was to move that minus 2 to the other side, I would need to add. And so x equals a positive 2. So I have my 2 solutions. So now I go to my set notation. So x equals the set. Smallest number is 0, comma, 2. So that's whenever you just have a GCF that can factor out. Now let's look at some that have more than, has something different. So let's look at the next set. And so if we look here, I look for that GCF, and there's not a number that can divide into both 1 and 4 bigger than 1. So my GCF is just 1, and there's no x in both of them. So I really don't need to even write that. So now let's figure out what other methods do I have. Well, I have 2 terms and a minus sign. So because those 2 things are present, I look to see, can I take the square root of x squared? And can I take the square root of 4? And the answer is yes. When you take the square root of a number x to a power, it halves the exponent, so that would give us a 1. Square root of 4, 2 times 2 is 4, so 2. So I have x and a 2 in each parenthesis. One of them is going to be plus, one's going to be minus. And then that equals 0. So I have my 2 factors. And so I'm going to go ahead and go to my chart. And so I'm going to set x plus 2 as one of my factors and x minus 2 for the other. And so x plus 2 equals 0. I need to move the 2 to the other side. So when I do that, it becomes x equals negative 2. X minus 2 equals 0. You need to move the minus 2 to the other side. So when I do that, it becomes positive 2. So those are my 2 solutions. So x equals, the smaller number is negative 2. The larger number is 2. That's your answer. So again, this was 2 terms, so there was a minus sign that separated. There wasn't a GCF I could take out of each of them, so I knew I needed to find another method. So let's look at number 4. So I look at 9 and 25. Is there a common factor? No. My GCF is just that 1, so I really don't have to worry about it. Now I go, okay, I've got 2 terms and a minus sign. So that means I need to try to take the square root of both pieces. So x squared, 9x squared, square root of 9 is 3, square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 25. And that would give me just the 5. So I have 3x minus 5 and 3x plus 5. And then that's equal to 0. So I'm going to set each of those equal to 0 in my chart. And so when I do that, the first thing I need to do is move that to the right-hand side. And so that's going to make it a positive 5 equals 3x. Divide both sides by 3. And so x equals 5/3. Now let's do the other one. 3x plus 5 equals 0. When I move that 5 to the right-hand side, it becomes 3x is equal to negative 5. Divide both sides by 3. X is equal to a negative 5/3. And so my answer is x equals the set negative 5/3, comma, 5/3. So let's look at this next problem. What is different, we still look for that GCF. And there isn't a GCF on this one, so besides 1, everything is already on the left-hand side. But this time we have, instead of 2 terms, we have 3 terms. So that means we go to the x. And so when we're looking at the x, we put the product of the first and last in the top part. So 21 times x squared gives us 21x squared. We put the middle term in the bottom, so negative 10x. Because if top is positive, the signs have to match, so we know both of them are going to be minus. So we need to look for the numbers that will multiply to give me 21. They'll add to give me negative 10. So it's going to be negative 3x and negative 7x. So because there's a 1 in front of the x squared, we don't have to do the box. We can go straight into the two parentheses. And so we have x minus 3 and x minus 7 equals 0. Now we're going to set our factors equal to 0. So we have the two factors of x minus 3 and x minus 7. We're going to set each of those factors equal to 0 and solve. So the x minus 3, when I move the negative 3 over to the right-hand side, it becomes a positive 3. And then let's take the x minus 7. When I move the negative 7 over to the right-hand side, it becomes a positive 7. And so my answer is the set, and the smallest number is 3, the largest number is 7. So 3, 7, and that's your answer. So now let's look at this next one. On number 6, we look at all three terms, see is there a GCF? And in this case, the GCF is 2. There's not an x in all three terms, so we don't have an x. And so we put 2 in front, and then we open up our parentheses. We want to think of each of those divided by 2. And so when I think about 2x squared divided by 2, it just gives me x squared. Negative 2x gives me negative x. Negative 24 gives me a negative 12. And it's still equal to 0. So now when I look in the inside of this, I have 3 terms. And that means that I need to use the x. To fill in my x, I take the product of my a and my c, so negative 12x squared. Negative x will be our difference. So what two things can multiply to give me negative 12 that have a difference of 1? So we have negative 4x and positive 3x. We know our larger sign has to be negative because of the negative down here. So we still write down our 2, and now we're going to go into our 2 parentheses, x minus 4 and x plus 3. And that's equal to 0. So now that we have it factored, the next step is to make our table. Well, we have 3 different factors. We have the 2, the x minus 4, and the x plus 3. If I set those equal to 0, two can't equal 0, so that's thrown out. I move my negative 4 over to the right-hand side, so that gives me x is equal to positive 4. Move my 3 to the right-hand side, gives me x is equal to negative 3. This is my smallest. So x is equal to the set, negative 3, 4. So now let's look at the next one. Number 7. I first look for that GCF. And there is no number that can divide into all of those besides 1. So that really doesn't help us any. Again, I have those 3 terms. So that means I go to the x. But also my a number is not 1. So that means I'm not only just going to use the x, I am also going to use the box to help me do this. So when I use the the x, that's the starting point. I take and multiply my a times c, so that's a negative 90x squared. And I want to see what gives me a difference of negative 13x. And so when we have negative 90, I go through the list and I'm like, 9 and 10's not going to work. I need one positive, one negative. I keep going through and I have 5 and 18. Well, if I made the 18 negative, the 5 positive, that works. So I have a negative 18x and a positive 5x. So those are the numbers that go in the boxes. And then we take our 3x squared and our negative 30 from the original problem. Looking at our first column, the number that can divide into both 3 and 5 is 1. The x is in both, so 1x. You don't really have to write that 1 because 1 is understood to be in front of any variable. 18 and 30, as 6 is a factor of both of those. That's our greatest common factor. My closest sign is negative. So one of my parentheses is x minus 6. Now let's find the other parenthesis. Taking our top row, 3 and 18, both of them are divisible by 3. There's an x in both pieces, so 3x. 5 and 30 are both divisible by 5, and my closest sign is positive, so it's a positive 5. So 3x plus 5. And that's equal to 0. So I have my two factors. So the next thing I do is go to my chart and write down each of my factors in a column. And so x minus 6 equals 0. Move the 6 to the right-hand side, and I have x is equal to a positive 6. 3x plus 5 equals 0. Move the 5 to the right-hand side, which will make it a negative 5. So 3x is equal to a negative 5. Divide both sides by 3. And x is equal to a negative 5/3. So these are my two numbers. This is my smaller number. So x is equal to the set negative 5/3, comma 6. And so we have to think about whenever that a is not 1, what else we need to do. Let's look at number 8. Again, the first step is look for that GCF. So when I look at that GCF at 9, 5, and 4, the best number that can divide into all of that is 1. There's not an x in all of them, so that GCF is now not helpful. So now the next step is we have a trinomial, meaning 3 terms. So I draw an x. Up at the top, I'm going to multiply my 9 times negative 4, so negative 36x squared. In the bottom, I write my middle term, 5x. So I am going to look for the numbers that will multiply to give me negative 36. That means they need to be opposite signs. And add to give me 5. So in other words, they have a difference of 5 because they're opposite signs. The larger one needs to be positive because the 5 is positive. So if I think about numbers that multiply to give me 36, the first ones that came to my mind was 9 and 4. Because my a is not 1, that means I need to use the box. Instead of filling in the box, the 9x and the negative 4x go in that diagonal. Then I go back to the original problem. 9x squared goes in the top left. Negative 4 goes in the bottom right. So now let's look at the first column. 9 and 4, well, only a 1 is a factor of both of those. But there is an x in both, so you write down x. 9 and 4, 1 is the best factor for both of those. So my first parenthesis is x plus 1. Now let's go to my second set, which is the rows. So 9x squared and 9x, both have a 9 in them as a factor, and both have an x. So we know we have 9x, negative 4, and negative 4. A common factor there is negative 4. So my second parenthesis is 9x minus 4. And again, we are still equal to that 0. Next step is to go ahead and make your chart. Make a column for each of your factors. And set them equal to 0. So x plus 1 equals 0. And 9x minus 4 equals 0. I got to move the 1 to the right-hand side. So x is equal to negative 1. Move the 4 to the right-hand side. So 9x is equal to a positive 4. This isn't done yet because we saw that 9 attached to the x by multiplication. So I divide both sides by 9. Gives me x is equal to 4/9. And so my set is, when I do the smallest first, then largest, negative 1, 4/9. So when we look at the problems on the back of the page, we have it to where we do not have everything on one side. So we're having to add an extra step in where you move things to the same side. You always want to move it to where your x squared is positive. So in this case, we want to move our 5x to join our x squared side. So since it's positive here, when we cross the equal sign, it's going to become negative 5x equals 0. And we still have that 2x squared from the original. Now let's look and see if we can figure out if we have any GCF. And so a GCF is going to be something that divides into both terms equally. And so there's not a number that can divide into both 2 and 5, but there is an x. So I'm going to factor out that x, and that gives us to where we're left with 2x minus 5 in the parentheses equals 0. Now that we have our factors, make our little chart and we list our factors, 2x minus 5 and x. I'm going to set each of those equal to 0. And so x equals 0, we're done with. The one on the other side, we have 2x minus 5, so we need to move our negative 5 to join our 0, making it positive. So 2x is equal to 5. We need to split the 2 away from the x. So we're going to divide both sides by 2. And so we have x is equal to 5/2. So we've got each of those solved for x. So now let's just write our solution. We say x is equal to the set, and then we look for our smallest number and our largest, 0, 5/2. And that's your answer. So let's go ahead and look at number 10. 10 has the same problem where we don't have everything on the same side. So we need to move the x squared to join the other x. So negative x squared comes over here to the other x squared. And so that leaves us with 6x squared plus 8x is equal to 0. And so our GCF is 2x, because that's the number that can divide all of these. We're going to divide them all by 2x, and we are going to write our 2x in front of the parentheses, 3x plus 4. is 6x squared divided by 2x is 3x. 8x divided by 2x is 4. So now we have it multiply our factors, or where we can multiply it out. We're going to take and make a chart with our two factors, 2x and 3x plus 4. So 2x is equal to 0, and 3x plus 4 is equal to 0. So the 2 is connected with multiplication, so we need to split it apart by dividing by 2. So x is equal to 0. We need to move the 4 to the other side by adding and subtracting, so we're going to subtract to move it. So 3x is equal to negative 4. Now we got to split the 3 away from the x by dividing. And so x is equal to a negative 4/3. So if we list our solution set in order from least to greatest, the negative 4/3 is listed first, and then the 0. So the next ones aren't just going to have that GCF that we need to factor out. We're going to have a little bit more involved with them. And so let's go ahead and look at this first one. We notice that we have variables on both sides and we have the numbers on both sides. We need to get everything moved to the left-hand side. So we're going to subtract the x squared. And since there's x squared here, we're going to combine it with it. We need to add the 1. And so when we do that, we're left with x squared minus 49 is equal to 0. So we have two terms. There's no GCF between them. So that means that we need to take and try taking the square root of both of the terms. So the square root of x squared is x. The square root of 49 is 7. So we're going to write our two parentheses, x minus 7 and x plus 7. And that's going to be set equal to 0 because we still have it set equal to 0 from the original. Now we're going to make our chart with our factors, x minus 7 and x plus 7. So x minus 7 is equal to 0, which means when we move that negative 7 to the right-hand side, it becomes positive 7. X plus 7 is equal to 0. We move that positive 7 to the right-hand side, it becomes negative 7. And so we have x is equal to the set. Our smallest number is negative 7. Our biggest number is 7. Let's try one more time with similar setup. Let's look at this next one. And we're going to get everything moved. And when you choose which side to move it to, you always want to move it to where your squared term is positive. And so for us, that means we want to move it over to the left-hand side because that will leave our square term positive. So we'll add the x squared and minus the 81. And so when we do that math, 3x squared plus x squared gives us 4x squared. Minus 81 is equal to 0. There's no common factor, so we can't take a GCF out. We have two terms, so that means we're going to look and see if we can take the square root of both of them, because we have a minus sign in between it. So square root of 4x squared is 2x. Square root of 81 is 9. So our two parentheses are 2x plus 9 and 2x minus 9 is equal to 0. So now we're going to use that chart to help us organize our factors. 2x plus 9 and 2x minus 9 are our two factors. Setting them equal to 0, we move the 9 to the right-hand side first. That gives us a negative 9 is equal to 2x. Dividing by 2 on both sides gives us x is equal to negative 9 halves. We're going to do the same thing on this other one. 2x minus 9 is equal to 0. Moving the 9 over to the right-hand side, we get 2x is equal to a positive 9 this time. Divide both sides by 2, and we end up with x is equal to 9 halves. So we need to write our solution as x equals the set negative 9 halves, 9 halves. And so that's the last of our binomial ones. This next set, we're going to the trinomials. So we'll have all three terms. We still have to get it to where everything is on the left-hand side because it's not the way it is right now. So we need to move that 80 over to the left, which is going to leave us with x squared plus 2x minus 80 is equal to 0. So since we have a trinomial, that means the next step is to make the x. When we make the x, we multiply the two terms, the first and the last term together, and that gives us your top, negative 80x squared, and 2x is the sum we're looking for. So since it is negative on the product, it means we have a plus and a minus. And so with that, we have to take and look to see what two things can multiply together to give me a positive, or should be a negative 80. They would add to give me 2. So the first factors I come up with when I think about that is negative 8x and a positive 10x. So when I write my factors, x minus 8 and x plus 10 are my two factors I come up with. So now let's make our chart. Our two factors are x minus 8 and x plus 10. So x is equal to positive 8. X is equal to negative 10. Oops, I should have shown you a little bit of work there. X minus 8 is equal to 0. So we move that 8 over here. X plus 10 is equal to 0. Move the 10 over here. So x is equal to the set negative 10, 8. So now that we have that one, let's go ahead and do one more like that. This time we have more terms involved, but it's the same process. So we need to move our x to come join the other x, and our constant to come join the other constant. And so we have x squared plus 10x plus 25 is equal to 0. So when we do our x, because we have three terms, there is no GCF on this one. Our product is 25x squared. Our sum is 10x. Well, when I think about it, what two things can multiply to give me 25 that would add to give me 10 is 5x and 5x. So I have, because my a is 1, I can go straight here, x plus 5 equals 0. And that's not the best way to write this. Because those match, the best way to write it is just once with the power of 2. So we have only one factor to do in our chart. So x plus 5 is the only factor we have to do in our chart. And so x is equal to negative 5. So when we do our set, the only number that gets written in our set brackets is negative 5. We don't have to note any way that it's used more than once. That's the only way that we have to mark it. Let's go ahead and look at number 15. Oops, I skipped too far. So we have to move our x squared and our x to come join the other side. So we subtract x squared and we add the x. And what that gives us is x squared minus 8x minus 65 is equal to 0. And so again, we have a trinomial, no GCF, and we're going to go through and find what parts make our x. So we have negative 65 x squared up at the top, because we multiplied these two together, and negative 8x in the bottom of your x. Now let's look for the two factors that will multiply to get us 65. We'll add to give us a negative 8. And when we do that, you come up with a positive 13x and a negative 5x. So our parentheses will be x plus 13 and x minus 5 is equal to 0. So make your chart, x plus 13 is one side of our chart and x minus 5 is the other. So x plus 13 equals 0. Move the 13 over to the side with the 0. We get x is equal to negative 13. X minus 5 is equal to 0. Move the negative 5 over to the 0. And x is equal to positive 5. So when I put these in order from least to greatest, the negative 13 shows up first, and the positive 5 shows up second. Let's look at number 16. Again, it's a trinomial, and we got to figure out how to get everything to one side. So that means that I need to take and subtract my 2 and add my 3x. When I do that, I end up with 4x squared plus 44x plus 96 is equal to 0. When we look to see is there a GCF, a 4 can divide into all of those terms. So we have a GCF of 4 that we're going to factor out. And so 4x squared divided by 4 is x squared. 44 divided by 4 is 11x. And 96 divided by 4 is 24. And so we need to do an x next. And so we have 24x squared and a positive 11x. So we want to think about two things that can multiply to give me 24 that would add to give me 8, or give me 11. So we have a positive 8x and a positive 3x. And so we write down our common factor of 4, and then we open up our two parentheses. X plus 8 and x plus 3 equals 0. And then we're going to do our chart. This time we have three factors. We have the 4, the x plus 8, and the x plus 3. So 4 can't equal 0, so we ignore that one. X plus 8 equals 0. We gotta move 8 to the join the 0, and we have x is equal to negative 8. X plus 3 equals 0. We got 3 to join the 0 to cross that equal sign, means that we have x is equal to negative 3. So my answer is x equals the set. The first number that's in our set is negative 3. Second, it's negative 8. Then we have a negative 3. And that's your answer. So number 17, we have two terms over here on the right-hand side that we need to move to join the left. So we need to move both of those over. So we're going to keep the 2x squared just like it is. And when we take and move the positive x to the left-hand side, it's going to become negative x. When we move the positive 21 to the left-hand side, it's going to become negative 21. And then we still have that equals, and this time these are both moved, so they're both 0. So now we have a trinomial. There is no GCF. So the next step is to go to your x. And so when we do our x, we take the product of our first and our last term, so negative 42x squared, and then our middle term becomes the bottom part of the x. So now we've got to think about two numbers that can multiply to give me negative 42 that would add to give me a negative x. And so the first numbers I'll think of are 6 and 7. They both need an x. They need to be opposite signs, and the larger one needs to be negative. So this would be the larger one, so it needs to be negative 7. And then I look back at my problem. I have a number in front of my x squared, so that means the next step is to go ahead and create my box. And the numbers from the problem get written in first. So this 2x squared to the negative 21 get written into your box. Then we take the numbers from up here and they get written in that diagonal. So 6x and negative 7x. Now we look at our first column and look for that GCF. So what number divides into 7 and 2? 1 is a common factor. And there's an x in both pieces, so 1x. Now if I look at 6 and 21, 3 is a common factor, and my closest sign is positive, so plus 3. That's one of my parentheses. Now my other parenthesis is going to be looking for this 2x squared and 6x. We have a 2 that can factor into both of those. And I double check it. 2x times 1x does give me 2x squared, so that works. Now my next row, negative 7 and negative 21. A 7 can divide into both. And my closest sign is negative, so it's negative 7. So I have 2x minus 7, and then that's equal to 0. So I now have it all the way factored out. So I go and use my chart, and I set each of the factors equal to 0. So my first factor is x plus 3. My second factor is 2x minus 7. And so if I say x plus 3 equals 0, when I move that 3 over on the left-hand side, it's going to become a negative 3. So x is equal to negative 3. 2x minus 7 is equal to 0. So move the negative 7 to the right-hand side, and it becomes a positive 7 is equal to 2x. Divide by 2, and x is equal to 7 halves. So when I write my solution, it's x equals a set negative 3, 7 halves. So now let's do the last one together. And so when I do that, I've got to still get everything over to one side. But when I take and move my x, I subtract it from both sides. that's going to give me a number I can combine. And then I move that -9 to the other side by adding 9 over here. And so I have 4x squared minus 12x plus 9. Is there a common factor between all of those I can bring out? And the answer is no. So I have a trinomial, so that means I go to the x. And when I'm filling in my x, the product goes up in the top, so 36x squared. The middle term goes in the bottom, -12x. So what can multiply to give me -36 that would add to give me -12? That's -6x and -6x. And since there is a number in front of my squared, that means my next step is to go ahead and draw in the box. And we're going to fill in that box. And so the 4x squared from the beginning and the 9 from the end, the last term, are the two things that go in from here. Now, if I look up at the beginning, at my story, I have a -6 and a -6. So those go into the other two spots, -6x and -6x. Now in the first column, 4 and 6 have a 2 in common, and they both have an x, so 2x. 6 and 9 have a 3 in common, and the closest sign is negative, so it's minus. So I have 2x minus 3. First row, I have a 2 in common and an x in common. And the second row, a 3 can divide into both, and my closest sign is negative. So that instead of me writing it again, I just write a squared. So 2x minus 3, that quantity squared, is equal to 0. So that means on this chart, we only have one factor we have to work with, 2x minus 3. So when I set 2x minus 3 equal to 0, and I first move that 3 over, gives me 3, is equal to 2x, divide by 2. And so x is equal to 3/2. And so my answer is x equals the set 3 divided by 2, and then close my set.